Yo, this hot, this the spot, there it is, pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and life to stream right to you, from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a comedy podcast to help you find your inspiration. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Welcome, thanks for joining us. We just moved into the new studio, new apartment. Hence why this sounds a little different. We'll be tweaking the space to get the audio right. Hopefully you won't hear apartment renovations on the podcast again. Fingers crossed. I'm super excited to share today's episode with you because our guest, Emma Arnold, is awesome. She shared so much great stuff on a wide range of topics. I think you're going to like it. Let's just get right to it. Here's my chat with Emma Arnold. Tell me if you get this a lot, because I figure you might. A lot of people ask you, how do you get it all done? Because you've done a lot. You've put out 4 albums. You've started a couple of popular festivals. You have 3 kids, and they're not like, you didn't have triplets who are all in diapers. You have double-digit kids, double-digit kids. Teenager. You have a couple of teenagers.
I do. They're 12, 15, and 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, and
they're homeschooling right now too. Yeah. So it's been quite an adventure.
Hey, I bet. You've also written a book.
I've written a bunch of books, but only one good book. Like one decent book and a lot of really garbage books.
Okay.
Which is just how it works. That's how it works, you know?
And it's there's one that people through a Patreon can get access to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which it's kind of like, it's like how I've described it. And the reason no one will publish it is because it's like part book, part art gallery, part like interactive piece. Like when I had started it, my idea was I had written this book and I was going to release a chapter at a time because it's on a theme. Mm-hmm. And I had thought like, I'll release a chapter at a time. We'll do a live show element that will have my art, because I paint also, that'll have like a gallery in the back of the live show. And then COVID hit after we did the first one. So it's been kind of like a little more difficult to release it in the way I wanted. But yeah, it's I'm doing that too. So and then touring and all of that too.
Yeah. How do you get it all done? How have you? I mean, there's so many people where if they do one of those things, they're like, you know what? I'm going to put all this other stuff on pause for a little bit.
Well, it's funny because I think before the last year, I don't think I realized how much I was working. It's just kind of, I think like, I call it like single mom mode, like, and I've talked to other single parents and you just kind of get in this zone where you're just like, if you stop, the whole machine falls apart because there's not a co-parent there to be like, I got laundry, don't worry about it. Or I'll drive the kids this morning. And so you kind of just get in this mode of like doing everything all the time. And, it's funny because I often don't think of myself as working hard. It's funny. The way I was raised, my family is Swedish. Like my parents are actually in the backyard right now digging a hole because they're retired and they cannot stop doing things ever. Right. Like they're just like, my whole family is just like very work oriented and you just like always stay busy. And like a nap is like the worst possible sin you could commit against the universe is taking a nap. So I was definitely raised with like a really kind of wild and steady work ethic. But also I think in the last few years, I had pretty big burnout a few years ago. And so I started to like really start to focus my energy on the things that I was like, this either makes me money, I love doing it, or it helps other people. And so I really, part of the reason I think I can get a lot done is because I'm very, very efficient. I don't spend a lot of time like futzing around, because of that, like, I've been a mom since I was really young. And so it's like, you kind of get good at being like organized and thorough and just being like, I'm pretty good about keeping a routine, I think is a big thing. I'm, as somebody who like, I think I'm fairly neuroatypical. And if I don't have a routine where it's like in the morning, we get up and we do this and I eat breakfast, I go for a walk, I do yoga, I write. If I don't have that, the whole thing just starts to really crumble pretty quick. So
Right.
I think having a routine is a big part of it. But then also like, I just have a lot of things I want to do. Like I always have been since I was a kid. I mean, I was the kind of kid you had to keep busy. Like my parents, I was allowed as a kid to sign up for every single community ed. Did you have those where you were growing up, like in
Not to
South
my
Carolina?
knowledge. I kind
Like
of wish.
the schools here, they would teach like adults would teach classes in the schools at night, and you could take. So in a given week, I would take like 4 classes, and I would be taking like pottery throwing, beading, Spanish for beginners, and Thai cooking. And I always just have been like really interested and curious, and have always done a lot of stuff. Uh, and then I'll hit like, but then also I'll hit like these pockets where like I just don't do anything for a while. Like I'm a pretty good. I've learned in my adult life to become a rester, and like I'll do. Like after the festivals, I would always take like 2 weeks off and just like rest really, really hard and just not do anything. And I think that helps if I rest really good and like really just sort of let myself do nothing and read and watch movies and not feel guilty about not accomplishing anything. Then when I'm ready to start doing things, I'm bored and I'm like excited and want to start working again. So I think that kind of helps too, is, just having a lot of energy, I guess, is a big part of it.
Yeah, that's a good method to make sure you really rest, because a lot of people don't do that. And also it's just sort of knowing how you work best. And I don't think a lot of people are super aware of what works best for them, what method will work for them.
I think what I see from so many people that I've talked to about this, and like my partner who I've talked to about it a lot, is I see this cycle of guilt. I think that that's why people don't get things done, is because if you spend a lot of time feeling guilty for not getting things done, that like eats your creativity, eats your productivity. I mean, I don't think people realize like what a demon shame is and how much of your time and energy in life it can suck away from you. And like, I think that's been a big thing for me, is sort of realizing that I have these phases of like, whether it's depression and mania or just like, full moon, new moon, or whatever you want to call it. Like, I just always have been like the kind of person who like does, is super excited, and then is just kind of collapse. And I used to feel really guilty about that. And I think if people can like let go of the guilt of like I think that you should just be curious about your work habits and just be like, I had a friend for years who like, she was like, well, they say that you're the most productive in the morning. And she would always try to make herself get up. But she was like a total night owl. Like she would stay up till 4 every morning and then make herself get up at 7. And I'd be like, why don't you just work at 1 a.m. when you know that you have, that's when you have this like burst of energy. Instead, she was like always trying to mold herself into like this American ideal of 8 to 5 productivity, which doesn't fit a lot of us, it just doesn't work out.
You're right. I mean, the whole like the early bird gets the worm makes everyone think, well, that's the only way I can really approach this then. That's the only way I can really do it. And that's not really true. You can actually get stuff done. And it's like whenever you feel productive, that's the time you should be working.
Yeah.
But if the morning isn't that time for you, then don't worry about it.
And I think COVID has helped people start to be like, what is the worm? To start asking that question. And I think, the worm has always been money, like, how do I make money? And for me, I think maybe because I never have tied my success to money, to a fault probably. But I always decided, like, when I started comedy, all I've ever wanted to do is be able to support my kids. And I live very, very frugally to be able to always just pursue the projects I only want to do, to walk away from things that don't feel right. And I mostly, I definitely have had to compromise on that when I was broke and had to go do a show for, $800 that I was like, oh, this is not a heart one. But sometimes you got to make the money. But I think for the most part, if you can kind of like, I don't know, for me, I've tried to restructure what I think that the worm is, rethink success and be like, especially during COVID, I'm watching so many people right now be like, fall apart because for the first time they're working from home or they're not working as much. And so many of us have built our personalities around like our workaholism. And so I think like having to like reassess and be like, okay, well, what does success look like for me? You know, I sometimes will be like in the afternoon reading for a couple hours, and then I'll get this wave of like extreme guilt of like, what am I should be, and I'm like, no, it's totally cool. It's totally cool to read for a couple hours. That's great. Like, what a great use of your time, you know? So I think that maybe COVID will help people sort of refine that purpose, you know?
I definitely myself have tried to do that, and I've also hoped that other people do as well, because we're learning. My girlfriend's working from home, so for her, or like seeing her go through that, I have said I really hope that businesses sort of recognize that it's not necessary to make people like hump it to work every single day of the work week, when they could just stay home. They really don't need to be in the office. There are all these things that we do that are just draining our energy needlessly. And it's all because we feel like we have to do it. It's not because it's actually functional for us to do.
Yeah.
Or helpful at all for us to do. And I'm just all for what is helpful, what is functional.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think of my friends, I have friends in LA who they work 40 to 50 hours a week. You know, they write for TV shows and stuff like that. But they also have an hour and a half, 2-hour commute there and back every single night, you know?
Yeah.
And every single morning. And you're like, and now with COVID, they're all working from home. And it's funny to me because like, I can't imagine how post-COVID people will go back to how things were, because I just think people will be like, no, I'm not spending 3 hours of my day in my car.
Right.
I'm just not doing it. You know, it just seems like at least that very little piece of it has to change.
And so many people went to their hometowns and were working from home. So we're like, I don't even have to be in the state to do this job.
Yeah.
Like, why are you trying to make me do this? This ridiculous time constraint of traveling to work. I
know. I like had turned in packets for shows, you know, and been like, and they were like, yeah, well, you do have to live in LA. And I'd be like, are you sure? Like, are you sure I couldn't just like Skype in or like, you know, do punch-ups from home or whatever, you know, like. And everybody was always really adamant about that. So for me, I'm like, fingers crossed that maybe now the landscape will be a little more like, what if I lived in Idaho and raised my kids and also wrote for your amazing show? You know, like, honestly, that would be amazing.
The technology is only going to get better. We're at the bottom of this Zoom thing.
Yeah.
The technology is going to get so good, so crystal clear.
Yeah.
And there really isn't going to be reason. The monitors are going to get bigger, screens are going to get bigger. It's just not going to be enough of a difference. Yeah. It's going to be Back to the Future too. That's what I'm saying.
Which I have totally seen for sure. I actually just saw the first one like a few years ago because people were so annoyed with me for having never seen it that I finally sat down and was like, oh my God, I'm going to watch it. So people will stop being mad at me.
Did you enjoy the first one?
Yeah. And, you know, it's one of those, sometimes people, because I was raised, we didn't watch TV when I was a kid. Like, we weren't really allowed to watch TV or movies much. So, like, I a lot of times have, like, these big, gaps in my pop culture knowledge. And sometimes people were like, you have to watch this movie. And you'll watch it and you're like, this does not hold up. Like, it's, you obviously loved it when you were a kid and that's why you still love it. But Back to the Future was fun. I was like, oh, this is cute. And Michael J. Fox is really sweet in it. And,
I love Michael J. Fox in it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really cute.
And I heard that Tom Holland for Spider-Man was sort of trying to emulate, and you could see it in the performance, that he was trying to emulate Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, just as inspiration. And I think that's part of the reason why I like him so much as Spider-Man.
I did not also see Spider-Man, and I'm not 100% sure who Tom Holland is, because is that are you talking about the new animated one? My kids have
not the new animated one.
Oh, okay.
The new Marvel Cinematic Universe one.
I'm just not a superhero. My kids watch all that stuff, and a lot of times I will sit down with them and fall asleep to one of those movies. Like I have taken amazing naps through all of the what are the really long ones with everybody in them?
The Avengers movies.
The Avengers, yeah. I have paid for a $14 nap through all of those because I take my kids and then I just I always fall asleep. They're just not, I don't know why. I just never have really been a superhero person. Like, that's none of them. people always like, like, what about this person? What about Batman? What about, and I'm always just like, no, no, I don't really care about.
That's totally valid. That's interesting. So do you think that that's sort of I've never been to Idaho, so if I am being reductive here, please let me know. But
No, please.
does some of that is that sort of like a folksy sort of charm of Idaho to, not be so into pop culture like people on the coast? Maybe?
I think like a lot of my friends were like religiously homeschooled, and that's why they have like these like they were very sheltered, and like they have these pockets of ignorance because of that. And I'm actually different because my parents were hippies, and my mom she just did not believe in screens. Like she just believed that, like, my mom doesn't like TV, she doesn't like movies, she just does not get it. And she hates video games, and she just thinks that screen time is a waste. And she always was like, her big thing with us is she wanted us to be creative. She wanted us to grow up and be creative people. And so she didn't we were allowed to, like, it's not like there was none. Like, we were allowed to watch PBS a little bit, and we were allowed to watch movies very occasionally, but nothing with violence. It's funny. I had a very different upbringing than, like, a lot of my friends were allowed to watch violent stuff as long as there was no nudity or cursing. And my mom was like, fine with nudity and cursing, but like the second there was any violence, she would turn it off. And she's like, we don't glorify that in my house. And she was like,
good for her, honestly.
I honestly, yeah, like I hated her for it as a kid. I mean, because it made me such a weird kid, and nobody would come to my house and spend the night because they're like, well, you're not allowed to watch TV. What will we do? But looking back, yeah, I think it actually is probably a really cool thing. She was very before her time. We lived in this small town in northern Idaho, and we weren't allowed to play with like gendered toys when we were little. Like not allowed. That sounds really strict. She just tried to steer us towards stuff. Like, she didn't do gender. She didn't believe in that. She was like very before her. This is in the 80s in rural Idaho. Yeah. She was like very like anti like girly shit. And she was always very like pissed when people would, say like I was pretty and stuff like that. She was always like, she's smart, she's capable, like so far ahead of her time, and really like tried very hard to give us sort of this like progressive upbringing in a very conservative, shitty place, yeah. So I think it probably is part of a folksy thing in Idaho, but mine was very different than probably most Idahoans.
It's hippie.
Is that
it's
hippie?
Like you're saying, hippies. No,
Yeah,
that's cool. I dig that. Now, you have an interesting history for stand-up because, as I mentioned at the top here, there's so much that you've done, but you started stand-up 8 years ago. So you've packed a lot into 8 years.
I think it's 9 now. I think I'm at 9. But I'm not, I'd have to look for sure. But yeah, and it's one of those things, like, I always have been a little, as a stand-up, you're always a little like padding your resume, always. I swear to God, like Chris Rock probably pads his. Like, you're always like trying to declare yourself kind of legitimate. And so when people would ask how long I did it, I would always just, from the time of like 5 years, I would always be like, oh, about a decade. And I always felt kind of self-conscious because, like, I never really went through like kind of the wishy-washy open mic period most people went through, where they're like starting, but you don't know if you're going to be good enough. Like, because I was going through divorce and I was a single mom and I didn't have a career, I really was just like, all right, I'm being a comedian. And I went from open mics to being a feature in like 2 months. Like, wow. And it was just because I had some storytelling experience. So it's not like I had no stage time at all, but I really was just like, okay, I have to make this a job and it has to pay me. So I really like kind of just from the very beginning, I was fudging my way into stuff that I was like, already, at a year in, I was like, I've been doing this 5 years, and was always kind of fudging my way into stuff and sort of seat of my pantsing it. So yeah, seems to have worked out.
It absolutely has. And it was, you just really hit the ground running. Yeah,
I did. I kind of got lucky. I was at an open mic competition where David Tribble, who does the Tribble runs, which were a big thing out west. He was doing auditions and anybody could audition. And I had one of those times where you just like have a set that's beyond your actual talent level. And I like did really well. And he was like, okay, yeah, you're signed up to be a feature. And So I started making money pretty quick. And then I got, I'm very charming. And so when headliners would come through, I would just lay it on, and I think being a mom helped too. Like, a lot of times headliners, and now that I'm a headliner too, you get it. Like the feature and the host are always kind of like razzle dazzling you, hoping to get picked up to get taken on the road. And you're like, oh honey, I don't have the money to do that for you. But, I think, but they're also, usually pretty young. They're like 22, but I was 30 and I was like an adult and, sober and a mom, and was able to just like have a conversation with a headliner that was about like kids and adult responsibilities instead of just being like, a nervous host or a nervous feature. Like I was able to just be like an adult, and I think that got me booked a lot of times as I was able to just kind of be like, I got to get home. I got these kids, and people would be like, oh, you must've been doing comedy for a while because you're a grown woman, and so I just kind of was able to fudge through that too.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder, and you've probably been asked this before, but did the fact that you were going through a divorce when you were starting out, did that help generate material too?
Not really, I guess, because I have always been pretty careful to not talk about my ex a ton. I always felt like I have a few times, like I have a couple jokes about him, like one that's very, very tame. I had one joke about him in the very beginning, which I still stand by. It's a pretty solid joke, but, I just always felt like it wasn't fair to talk about him a whole lot, because I felt like like in a divorce, you both need to have your stories. Like, I feel like most of the conflict in a divorce comes from you, like each person trying to change what the other person's story is. And you just kind of need to be like, fine, that's what you're going with, whatever, even if it pisses you off or it's lies or whatever. And I felt like it was sort of unfair because like, here I had this audience of like thousands of people who are already on my side. And whereas he just had, a handful of people who, I don't know. I just always
standing in front of a bunch of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just always felt like,
balance out. Yeah.
And when I would hear comics bash their ex, I would always feel like, ugh, like sometimes it is funny, but sometimes it is like, especially if you have kids together, I would always be like, I don't want my kids to hear. I don't personally talk to my kids about their dad that way. And I never wanted them to hear me on an album or on a podcast, like shit talking their dad, which is, can be a fine line. Cause at the same time, I want to be honest about my experience with stuff. But so I've always kind of grappled with like, how much is okay to talk about as far as your experience and how much is, and I guess for some reason for me, I just always decided like making him a part of my act just didn't seem kosher for some reason.
Yeah, the only times I feel like it can work to talk about an ex is if they did something really bad. But if it's a breakup that happens because breakups happen, it isn't fair to just be like, well, here's my story. And I'm not going to give them a chance to defend themselves. Yeah.
Well, and I guess, because we had a really messy ending, and there was bad things that happened. But I guess I just sort of, I don't know, I guess for me, because there were kids involved, it felt different.
That's the other thing. Yeah. I mean, it's to me, I too get an icky feeling if somebody is bad mouthing their ex-spouse when their kid can read that in the magazine or a newspaper and hear that in a podcast. It's like, why would you put your kid in that position?
Yeah, because it's like if it's just me and probably if I didn't have kids, maybe I would have felt comfortable talking about him. But, when there's kids involved, I always just felt like I want them to, because maybe also because I have sons and I know that sons relate to their dad so hard. And I had read this book on divorce about like how a lot of times sons will feel like if their mom hates the dad, that they hate this male part of them as well. So I guess I maybe just wanted to always make sure my kids didn't feel like I hated their dad, even though I went through, I don't know if I ever hated him. I was really mad at him for a very long time. But I always tried to let my kids feel the energy from me that even though I was angry at him, I still cared for him and still loved him and still wanted the best for him. So I guess my comedy I didn't know how to make that funny.
Right. I see it sounds it reminds me a lot of you talking about your mom and how thoughtful she was about you. You're doing that
Mhm.
same thing with your children, which is very sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, maybe I've done this, and I actually probably have done the same thing my mom did, because my mom was also very neutral when she and my biological father split. She was always tried very hard to be nice about it. But like that dude was a monster. And honestly, as a kid, I could have used some backup of like, he's a piece of shit. You're right to hate him. So I have sometimes worried maybe I've done that to my own kids where like they haven't had the backup of being like, yeah, no, he sucks. It's okay to be mad at him for that stuff.
Hmm.
Although I do like if they are like, oh my God, dad's a liar, I'll be like, well, your dad does sometimes struggle with the truth. Try to be like neutral about it while also confirming. It's so hard. It's so
Yeah,
complicated.
yeah.
So I
Oh,
guess I
yeah.
just never wanted to like throw comedy on top of trying to be an adult and a good co-parent and a good mom. It was all the divorce was so complicated and so hard and so heartbreaking and
Yeah.
so prolonged too. It took us like 2 years to get
Yeah.
divorced. It was just one of those where you're like, man, we were separated for a long time and it was just such a mess. And I think it just was never funny to me.
Mm.
Like it just took a lot of years for me to finally like be able to be in a place where it was like I could laugh about it and be like,
Mm.
we were just, a couple of kids working through our trauma, like
I see what you mean. And
yeah.
and that stress didn't interrupt, so to speak, your creativity? For some people, maybe even myself, if I was going through something like that. I mean, when I've been down, it helped me to do stand up. But I do think there are people who, if they were going through something that's stressful, it would be hard for them to hit the ground running like you were and go out and perform and create.
I think that how like a lot of times when somebody goes through a breakup, they already have like a new man lined up or a new woman lined up or whatever. And
Uh-huh.
like so it's like they never really go through the heartbreak of the breakup because they already have like a new relationship. And honestly, I think stand up was that for me for a long time. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was in the honeymoon phase of stand up at the same time I was like losing my house and my kids were heartbroken and like my ex had just gone completely off the deep end and we were not seeing him for months at a time or hearing from him. And, I like while all of this personally, all of this heartbreak was happening, I was like sort of falling in love with comedy and falling in love, honestly, with myself too at the same time. Like, really, like comedy is sort of like I was this very, I was a housewife before and we had a pretty traditional, it's surprising now, but we had a pretty traditional, marriage and I don't want to even say traditional. We had a very patriarchal,
Mm-hmm.
marriage. And, so I think like it was sort of like helping me find myself. And so I don't think it really like, I don't think I really paid attention to, I didn't miss him. You know what I mean? Like I was so excited to be free and so
Mm-hmm.
excited to be on my own and to have my kids on my own. And I was so excited to be a single mom and so like so into stand up and just like falling deeply in love with it. And so I think for a long time it didn't, I don't think I really mourned my divorce until a few years ago when I finally like had enough like financial and emotional space to it was when I went through another breakup and I finally was like, oh, that relationship really was like just sort of the end of my first relationship. It was the end of my marriage, just extended through another person, which I think happens when you don't mourn something properly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it didn't stall it for a long time, but it's funny because I don't really I like I said, because I do these phases of like rest and like work,
Mm-hmm.
I don't usually feel stalled. Like I hadn't written a joke during COVID for a long time. And I've been like, but I've just kind of been like, yeah, that's okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not super funny right now. And it's kind of sad. And
Right.
like, I've just recently kind of started to feel that muscle starting to flex again. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think I've always kind of gone in and out of like sometimes I also like my writing. I think I write comedy differently than a lot of people. Like I won't write a joke for a long time, and then in a half hour, I'll write an hour of comedy. Like
Right.
I'll sit down and be like, oh my God, and another thought and another thought. Like that is that sort of like mania depression thing. But it's
Yeah.
like, I will only write for like a half hour, once every 3 months, but then I spend like 3 months honing and figuring stuff out. So yeah.
I think that's one of the things that's really jumping out at me, and it's something along the lines of what we were talking about before about knowing yourself. But I think also giving yourself the space to not be guilty, like you were saying earlier, and also to really be present is
Yeah.
very crucial. I bet it's harder to sit down for 30 minutes and write so much if you're not being present in that moment. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you have
Or
a
if you're
good way to recognize.
worried, I think it's easy to get like when you're in a dry spell, whether it's writing or painting or jokes or just any sort of creativity, it can get like you'll be in this like place where you're not creative, and I think it can start to feel like panicky for a lot of people. And I've really just learned when I'm in that dry spell to be like, that's totally normal. It's not like Da Vinci was every second of every day creating. Like
Right.
sometimes you're creating, sometimes you're honing, sometimes you're resting, sometimes you're dicking off.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you're having fun too. Like I think a lot of times when I don't feel like making something, I'll be like, cool, that means it's time for you to observe. And I'll like make sure that I'm out in nature a lot, and I'll observe a lot of nature, or I'll go and like sit in crowds of people and just sort of like listen to the cadences of people's voice. And, like, I think
Yeah.
it's just kind of, sometimes I think it's important to, if you're feeling like I can't create, it's like, well, that's because it's like that little fairy or whatever is not on your shoulder right now. So you
Right.
need to walk around and go just be a part of your actual world.
Oh, I love that you're saying this. It also reminds me of something a previous guest posted on YouTube. She's a singer-songwriter, and she did a video for her YouTube page that was for a week she followed the daily routine of Beethoven, and
Oh,
there was a
cool.
lot of his day. It was pretty cool. There was a lot of his day that was just like, I guess just dicking around is the best way to put it, because he would just get up and sort of like splash his hands in the water and hum, and then he'd like
I
take
love
a
that.
walk. Yeah, he'd like go take a walk to the pub and just hang out with friends, and that was like a daily activity. And I think, and it's just because different people maybe infect how they think on other people and other types of thinkers, but I think people don't feel the freedom to do stuff like that, especially
Yeah.
in America, where it's like,
Yeah.
you got to work hard, then you can play hard. But in all honesty, not everyone's brain works that way, and that's not a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
just
We're not
different
all
ways
hedge
brains
fund
work.
managers, you know?
Right.
I feel like that has infected. I've been thinking this for a while, because like we're sort of watching this, weird thing in our society happen right now where you're like, okay, every society has always had this billionaire class, and under them, it, becomes this stratosphere of like a mix of the working poor, the tradespeople, and the artisans, who we all serve the billionaire class. We all do. It's just the way things have always been. And the billionaires are better or worse at any given time. And I've always felt like, and I have hung out with a lot of rich people, and I have been like the, like poor that they walk around and like, look, I brought a poor to this party. And rich people are not any happier than the rest of us. Like, it's
true,
not like
yeah.
money fixes any of this shit. It's just, I've always felt like being an artist is this beautiful sweet spot in society that if you're living it right, like can be sort of like, you get to just splash your hand in the water and hum, like you get to be like, this is part of my day. This is part of my process. Because like, I think, you can't have I know some writers are like, I get up at 6 and I write from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and it's a day job. And I'm always like, ew, why would you do that? Why? Like, I always loved Ursula Le Guin's schedule, where she like gets up, she lays in bed for an hour thinking stupid thoughts. She has some breakfast. She writes for 3 hours. From noon to 5, she sees friends or gardens. And then from 5 p.m. on, it says, I'm not very useful from these hours till morning. And I just love that. Like, the idea that you're not supposed to be useful. That's not why you're here, like I think if that's what you feel like you're here for, that's got to be exhausting. Like
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, to some degree, I do feel like you should be useful to your fellow human beings. I do think that that's true, but I don't think that that's what hedge fund managers think of
No, they're
when they
thinking
work
something else totally.
75
Yeah.
hours a week,
Right.
And so I love that idea of like, my day is kind of often, I mean, I have 3 kids and we're homeschooling. And so, there's a lot more structure to that and stuff. But a lot of times my day is filled with like, take a walk, look at leaves, listen to the sounds of traffic, like I try to like do a lot of things that maybe seem pointless, but sort of just ground me back into my body and, kind of remind me where I'm at actually in time and space and, just kind of like, I don't know, slow down. I've always I'm a very busy, I have a hummingbird energy and I'm always trying to like slow it down, take it a little smoother. So yeah.
I'm really encouraged by you saying all of that.
Yeah, I think it's a healthier way to live for all of us,
I do too. I honestly, when I've worked on just one thing all day and, got it done, I didn't feel as accomplished at the end of that day as one of the days where I worked on a few different things that, if I like bounced around between a few different projects or activities that I want to engage with, then I feel like I've had a productive day. And I also feel like you were saying, like more grounded in my body and who I am.
Yeah. And I've had days where like I'm like working on a project and I'm really like, I get that like ADHD brain where I just sink into something and then I'm like, oh, I haven't eaten or gone to the bathroom.
That's exactly what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that can be really satisfying too, as long as you're like really finding that groove of the project, that can be really good too. But it also, I think like if you're doing that every single day after day, then your body suffers. And it's so easy to forget, like that's it. You are your body. Like we do suffer such a separation in our culture of like mind and body. But like being sick this last year has been a good reminder of like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the one you get. And so it's funny because I think weirdly being chronically ill has been this like amazing thing for me to be like, some days I cannot do anything. I can barely get out of bed and I'm so in so much pain and so sick that I like cannot do anything. And it's enough to be like, I just got to be able to keep some food down and, to be able to and if I try to push that, my old MO would have been to like work through that and try to push it. My body is like not having any of that. Like it will just, instead of one day, I'll be down for 3 or 4. So it's really sort of forced me to be like, when I'm starting to have a bad day, to just like rest and watch Pride and Prejudice and, eat an apple and kind of focus on feeling good. And I think if we all just spent a little more time focusing on feeling good instead of everything else, if it was just like, in the mornings from 9 to 11, I focus on feeling good. Like, what do I need, or whatever time of day that works for people,
I totally love that because it really does speak to everything you've been saying of being present and knowing where you're at. And it for me, when I have tried to say like, okay, every day at this time, I'm going to do this, then I'm really setting myself up to feel guilty when I miss that.
Yeah.
Because the reality is something comes up or something else just needs to take precedence. And, I didn't think it would take as long as it did, but it is taking as long as it's going to take. And I have to focus on that thing instead of what's on the calendar. And so I just end up feeling guilty. And then that makes me feel like I'm not being productive. And that slows me down from being accomplishing anything I want to do. And it's just bogging my mind down. So I really need to take the approach that you're taking and say like, okay, this is where my head and where my body are at today. And I just need to recognize that and act appropriately.
It's really helped my writing so much to do that because, when I would be working on a chapter of the book, I could try to force that as many times as I wanted. I for a long time would be like, I would do the button chair thing. Like, if you're not going to write, if your butt's not in the chair, and I would write this thing out and write it out and write it out and write it out. And I finally realized like I get just as much from taking a bath from going for a walk, that like eventually the idea that I was trying to force out, like I had been working for a while on this really difficult chapter that was about like doing mushrooms and like coming to terms with mortality and all of this stuff. And I kept like struggling with it. And I could never get the tone of it right. I rewrote it, like one of those times where you restructure it, like the end is the beginning is the end. What if you start in the middle? Like just could never get it. And eventually I just was like, I started to have this realization that like that every time I've done that, it's taken me twice as long to write the thing than if I just like write a paragraph, go for a walk, noodle it, come back, like if I just kind of like let myself chew it a lot more before trying to swallow it, And that seems to have been helping. And I do write, like I write quite a bit, but I've just started to do it. Like, I think we've gotten away from like the muse in our society. I think of like Chuck Wendig is one of those writers who's like, you sit down, you do 1,500 words a day, butt and chair. And I read his book, when I was a young writer. I actually started in fiction. I started writing fiction when I was 18. Oh. I've written a bunch of fiction books. I was really like sure I was going to be a fiction writer. And I really subscribed to that mentality for a long time. And then as I've gotten older, I've kind of realized like, it's okay to be, maybe you're that kind of writer, dope. Like maybe you're Brandon Sanderson and you write 40,000 words a week and you have every one of your books is 1,000 pages long. That's dope. For me, I am one of those writers that like, I have to be in the right place. Like to find exactly what I want to say. It's kind of, it's kind of like stand-up where like you'll have 10 sets and one of those is the one that you wanted, like, yeah, the other ones were 8s and 9s, but then every once in a while you either have a 1 or a 10, like, I think like those are like, it's okay to like, to be struck by lightning and to like cultivate that, but also just be like, yeah, it doesn't just fucking happen. Like the beautiful creative thing that we want to be part. Well, I want to be part of my work, to be special and not just more drudgery, like when did art become drudgery? I hate it. I hate it. We're supposed to be like mystical. I think it's because the conservatives have taken over everything and they're like art is for queers and they hate queers and they hate art. And all of those of us who are queer and artists have been like, since we were kids, bullied and beaten up for being who we are. And so we're always trying to be like normal citizens who do an 8 to 5
and capitalism.
Yeah. And
play
just
a role in that.
Yeah. And instead I'm like, I don't even care about any of that stuff. I just want to like raise bees and dicker, like go and smoke a little pot on the weekends and look at trees and do some really deep writing about what I believe like humanity is about and mortality and all like those things are what I think of being an artist is about, is like feeling the conscious collective, being a part of something mystical and bigger than what we are. And, comedy, people shit on it and they're like, comedy is not an art. Well, I'm sorry, but it clearly is. It's clearly an art and it's clearly philosophy. And, and yeah, you have people out there doing one-liners and that's art too. Sorry, it's all fucking art. And everybody wants to be like, tough Joe Rogan, conservative libertarian assholes about it. But like at the end of the day, we're working a couple hours a night. Most of us are pretty mentally ill and pretty neuroatypical. And I'm ready for, I don't know. I feel like we've spent so long as a society sort of like letting this minority of like very unhappy, uncreative assholes determine what our society looks like, what our laws are, what our days look like.
How we should talk to people. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that fuck your feelings thing. I feel like that is like, I've always felt like that is this like nugget of truth about what our society is. Fuck your feelings. And like, that's who those people are. And the rest of us need to be like, no, actually fuck your feelings.
Yeah.
And to stand up for ourselves.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I've long been annoyed with the attitude of, or not the attitude, but the adjustment that society makes to the dumbest thoughts, where it's like, okay, all these people are screaming about something, but they are wrong. They are factually wrong, or they are being really stupid about this. We can't dumb things down so that they can get on board. We have to lift them up. or
Yeah.
or it's just survival of the fittest at some point. But I hate this, and I really think it's another one of those big problems in society. Is just how dumbed down things are, and now people can have their own set of facts, and they don't have to go by what experts say.
Yeah.
It's just what they feel, their gut feeling. I
And
think you mentioned Joe Rogan, and sometimes he's saying what we're saying, and sometimes he's saying something that's sort of antithetical. And I'm like, well, what is it, Joe Rogan?
yeah.
What side are you going to be on with this? Because you
Yeah.
can't tell Candace Owens that she has to, like, be malleable to her with her opinions and actually look at facts and let that guide you. And then with some other situation, sort of pick and choose what facts you're going to use.
And then let a flat earther come on, like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't fully, I've always watched the Rogan, Brian Callen, Fighter and the Kid stuff kind of from the outside of like, I'm raising sons. I feel like I'm pretty immersed in masculinity. I have brothers, like I feel like I have a pretty good handle on masculinity, and none of the men are like that in my life. None of the men. And I feel like just like, the fuck your feelings people have sort of taken over everything. Like the Rogan-esque, mentality has sort of artistically taken over comedy and taken over masculinity in a big way. And I don't know. I feel like I've never really understood the appeal, other than it just kind of seems like when you were in high school and like there were a bunch of jocks in the hall, and your friend who was usually nice to you as you walked by, all of a sudden pushed you into a locker because you're just like, oh, he doesn't want to get beat up by these guys, so he's going to beat the shit out of me. Like, I don't know.
I think you are probably around more of that than I would, so I can't really point to it. I've never gotten a good vibe from Brian Callen, so I've just never paid any attention to him. And I feel
I only use him as an example just because he's so in the news right now,
but there are a lot of people like that, and people that have that vibe are going on Rogan. Not everyone on Rogan is like that, but I just mean those are the comics that roll with Rogan, and I just generally don't pay attention to them. But you probably see them more if you're touring, You see and like that.
And like, it's funny because people are always like, yeah, that's an LA thing. And I'm like, no, New York has its own brand of bro comedy stuff that's been going on for years.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. I feel like encouraged by, that's why I started the festivals, was because every time you would complain about sort of this bro culture and this like toxic masculinity in comedy, men would just be like, well, if you don't like it, start your own shit. And so I finally was just like, fine, I will, and it wasn't because I like had this like burning desire to be in front of things. In fact, I think honestly running the festivals has kind of hurt my career, because people just assume that if you're running a show or you're running a room or if you're running a festival, it's because you're not funny. So I feel like it's also really set me apart, I think, with comics a lot of times, as like you're a booker instead of a comic, and I've sort of seen that in like relationships I've had with, like just not like friendships, but just like professional relationships I've had with people where you're like, oh, this person sees me as a booker, not as a peer, But at the same time, I felt like I wanted to I don't know. I just felt like I wanted there to be somewhere safe, like I had been to so many festivals where you'd be harassed and it would just suck, and you'd have to, you'd be there and you'd have to be on a podcast where everybody was just trash talking women the whole time and just being homophobic and racist. And if you're like, this is stupid. Like, I remember I did a festival in Nashville once and I was on stage with Ralphie, and who everybody seems to love. And I don't really understand that. And he's one of those guys like,
what's it, Ralphie May?
Yeah.
Is that the one who passed away?
Yeah. And everybody, after he died, all of a sudden you couldn't critique him anymore. And it was kind of like,
I thought that was interesting too, the way it would seem like almost like the week before people were like, he did this shit, he did that, and he's terrible. Yeah. And then he passed away and everything was like, gonna miss him. And I'm like, I never heard anyone talk positively about him.
No, and he,
And he also
he
would say
had
the N-word. So, you know what?
constantly.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
give two shits about him. I never liked him either because of stuff like that.
No, and I was on a show. It was a game show. It was a roast beforehand that we weren't told what it was. It was a roast of Ralphie May, me and like four other comics, and it was us against Ralphie. And I was like, it was his crowd, and I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
But we got into it, and he was being so sexist and so racist and used the N-word and was just being awful. And I remember just being like, if I stand up right now and I'm like, fuck this, like my career will suffer. Ralphie's won't,
Right.
I'll get probably in trouble with the festival. I'll probably not be booked back here again at this club, and it was so frustrating. And I remember just being like, I'm done with this. I'm done. I'm not doing festivals where I feel like I can't be treated like a person, and that, asking to be treated like a professional is going to get me fired. So,
Right.
that
I've kept up a little bit with, when you've called out stuff like that. And I've appreciated it. Even, I think you even tweeted not so long ago about Bill Maher saying something.
Oh yeah.
Like,
you know what? It's funny. People were so mad at me for not like telling that full story. And they're like, show the receipts, tell us what he said. Do all, and I was like,
I hate about Twitter. It's like,
I know. And I'm like, Bill Maher is incredibly litigious and he has a zillion times more money than me. No, I'm not going after Bill Maher. Like, I'm not going to lose my car because I'm going to go after. But what I can say is I spent a week in Hawaii with Bill Maher, with several other comics. And I have never been around anyone who is a bigger piece of shit in my entire life.
Wow.
And I was raised around a bunch of drunk piece of shit rednecks, like he was so sexist and so racist and so transphobic and regularly used the N-word, regularly used slurs, and it was wild because so there were 5 comics, but he rolls with like a posse. And he has like a whole bunch of people, and we were kind of hopping from island to island doing this stuff. And it was such a mix of like this like really amazing trip that I would have never gotten to go on. Like we flew on private jets. I did a New Year's Eve at Eddie Vedder's house. It was bananas. But at the same time, the whole time I was just like, I was so shocked by how like the people in his group, I would be like, do you hear what he's saying to Margaret Cho? Like everybody's sort of just putting up with it and laughing about it, or like the things he would say behind people's back and things he was saying about strangers. We went to a strip club and I was just like, it was just so disgusting to be with him. And the people in his friend group, I was like, how do you, like, they seemed like decent people at the time. And I was like, how do you juggle this? Like one of the guys had a trans daughter. And I was like, how do you juggle what he is saying about trans people and then having a daughter? And like, I don't know, it was a really surreal experience. And, it was very strange to have like these other people I respect who are kind of just tolerating his behavior because that's comedy. That's what comedy has been, is like.
Yeah. Is it just a lot of people kissing ass or at least not rocking the boat so their career doesn't get affected?
I think like Margaret Cho is one of my favorite comics, and I think she's a wonderful person.
She's a legend, yeah.
She's a legend. She's an amazing person. Getting to spend a week with her, like I'm not a starstruck person, but and I wasn't like, giddy around her or anything, but I was really like, this is fucking ridiculous that I just get to like hang out with her. And she was so kind and lovely the whole time. And I've since then seen her on shows and been around her more, but at that time I was really just like, holy fucking Margaret fucking Cho. And she like, he was being racist and shitty. And I think honestly, it's just like, telling Bill Maher to stop it isn't going to stop him. So I think you do just, as comics, we do just sort of get like, whatever. I just like, I'm here to do a job. I don't have to try and change this person. I think it's easy to just sort of, especially for older comics who kind of like, God knows what Margaret put up with. I know what I put up with, and I know that it was probably better than what Margaret put up with,
Right.
Like, I think like knowing the shit that like people have, I don't know. I felt like she, like her and Dana Gould and some of the other people were just kind of like, it's Bill, you know, you're not going to change Bill. And it's like, for me, it was like, I was after that, like, I'm never working with, even if I was desperate for the money, I'm never working with Bill Maher again. I was like, that was it for me. And anytime his name has come up, I've always been like, he is trash. He's a terrible person. And it was upsetting to me to be with 20 other people who also knew he was a terrible person, who were all just kind of like, that's Bill, you know? And I was just like, I have always, you know, maybe it's me, maybe I've always just been kind of a black and white person that way. And I'm not very bendable, you know?
But I'm with you. I don't know how I'd be able to stomach that. I mean, you would just want to get away from it, you know?
Yeah. It was funny. It was funny to see, though. I think one thing about that is, like, I've also never met anyone as miserable as Bill Maher.
He seems like he is. Yeah.
Genuinely, like, we were out in the ocean in Hawaii. It's this beautiful, perfect day. We're bobbing up and down. There are whales like 150 yards from us. We're watching them spout. We're just like bobbing up and down. There's a group of us. It's like 20 of the like coolest people I've ever met, like showrunners and just like people that are like so funny. And you're like, oh my God, that's my favorite. And like, I was just like, oh, this is so cool to be in this beautiful place with these talented people. And I remember just like, and there was a rainbow and we were all just like, oh, all of us were just like, oh, this is so spiritual. What an amazing moment. And then right then Bill Maher swims over and he goes, this is fucking ridiculous. What a fucking, there's no waves. We can't body surf. I fucking hate Hawaii. And I was like, this is this guy's whole deal. Like he hates everyone and everything and he's never going to be happy. So I guess, you know, at the end of the day, I guess enjoy the rest of your years being racist and miserable.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, people don't need to look up to that guy. You mentioned, I know there's no segue.
I've never been a segue comic, so hit me.
Right. I do want to talk about your festivals because you've started a couple very popular ones, 208 Fest and Comedy Fort. Now, 208... it was in September of 2019 was the last time it was up.
Yeah.
And Comedy Fort postponed till next September.
Yeah. And I should say, so I'm no longer with Tree Fort. I'm not doing Comedy Fort this year. Last year, I just decided, I was just like, I had been so busy and I was just like, I don't really feel like putting my time and energy into someone else's thing anymore. You know, like I had already left them, which then weirdly like turned out to be sort of prophetic because it was like I left Comedy Fort and then we had decided not to do 208 in 2020. We were going to take a year off and maybe be done. We hadn't decided yet, but we had decided to take the year off for sure. So then luckily I hadn't put into this like 9 months of work into two festivals because they both got canceled. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm very, very glad I did those. They were a huge amount of work and, you know, really amazing and satisfying. And for me, it was so cool because I was able to bring in a lot of people who like, I think have been mistreated in other parts of comedy and to just be able to be like, our thing was always like, we fed everybody. We made sure they had a safe environment. We made sure they got in front of like really fun crowds. And we just tried to do really, really hard to like take care of everybody and be really good to them. And like to remind comics, because I think, you know, you can start to feel like a raccoon out there, you know, like you get treated like shit and nobody seems, you know, like a lot of times at festivals, like there's no green room, there's no food, you know, and so I just really wanted to like make an environment where comics felt like loved and appreciated. And like the last 208 was so amazing. And people afterward, the last day, people were crying and they were like, I feel like it's the last day of camp. And that was what I always wanted was I wanted it to feel like camp. I wanted it to feel like where like you made all these new friends. And I always wanted to get rid of the stratification of like, you know, famous comics and not famous comics. I always was like throwing people into situations where like there were ways to be social and kind of let go of that. Like, I feel like it can be so cliquey in comedy, which is one of my least favorite things about it. And to remind people that like, hey, you were an opener who was excited to meet a headliner, like maybe give that energy back, you know? And I feel like we did a really, really good job with the festivals. And if we were done, I'm fine. I'm done, I think, honestly. we had talked back in the fall, or I guess like the spring, about doing 208 again, and had decided to take the year off. And we haven't talked about doing another one. Like we haven't been like, well, we got to get started for 2021. I think we were kind of like, that was super cool. I don't know for sure if we won't do it again. It's possible we might, in another 6 months be like, hell yeah, let's get it together. But it was, I ran both of those with my ex-boyfriend. And we had broken up during the first festival, like 2 weeks before the first festival, and we ran them for 3 years together.
Also, running 2 a year is a lot.
2 a year was a lot. Yeah, it was. Much. It was so much work, and I had to put a lot of my own career stuff on hold because I was like working on that stuff and trying to get the logistics figured out. And it definitely was. It was a huge energy suck. Like after the festival, I'd always just be like a wreck for 2 weeks. Like it was just. So it was always a joke. Like I always cry at comedy festivals. I do not know why. It is just like I get overwhelmed. There's so much happening. I always cry. But at my own festival, I would always keep it together until Sunday night, right after the last show. And then I would just sob hysterically like 4 years running. So I don't know. I kind of want really.
You want to take a break then?
Yeah. My whole body would just be like, it's done. It was just like, it's also so much pressure and so much fear. Cause the whole time it's like, how when you throw a party, you're like, no one's going to come and you're just like terrified something's going to go wrong. It's that, but for like 5 days and just constant fires you're putting out and like little things that go wrong. Like I was so mad at Tree Fort last year at Tree Fort, at Comedy Fort. The comics here, the local comics took all the comics to this racist breakfast place in the morning. And I was like, when I texted and was like, hey, where is everybody at for breakfast? They were like, we're at Big City Coffee. And I was like, what the fuck? Like I've booked this very diverse festival. I've assured all these out-of-town comics, like this is a very safe place. I know Idaho has a reputation. Boise is very liberal, except for this one coffee shop, I was there was like little stuff like that would go wrong that would drive me crazy. But, it was definitely, there were always these moments in it where like last year, Maria Bamford was our headliner and she was doing her new hour, which, Weakness is the Brand is now that album. And it's the best hour of comedy I ever saw. And I got to see it like in this unique spot where I was like watching the crowd and watching her from this corner. And it was so cool. And I cried through the whole set because I was just so moved because she like really gets into mental illness stuff. And it was so powerful. And it's such a good hour. It was like why I became a comedian, just to be like that right fucking there. And it was so cool to have brought her, and to have had she's my idol, and to have her like headline my festival and, to be like, to know her, to be friends with her, to be just like, a peer is just so fucking like beautiful. Like it was such a beautiful moment to watch her do this hour. And so I'll miss moments like that, but I will not miss not sleeping for 5 days or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long that was. And it was a lot of work.
It is. I tell you. And there's the person who runs, well, I won't say what fest. It's a big fest in the country. And he was saying that he kind of feels like it's not really a festival if it's not in multiple venues. And I'm like, oh boy. You are putting on a lot of pressure on yourself, a lot of headaches on yourself.
We always did 5. We did 5 at least different venues. And it was, I would always, every year I would lose my big toenails from walking so much.
Oh, wow.
Because I would be running back and forth between venues the whole time, just like, and the last year I was like, this is ridiculous. You need to delegate this. You're being absurd. But it was because I would be so terrified that the show wasn't going well, or what if the audience isn't good, and what if the sound is bad? So I would be like, you're not going over there. And then I'd be like, I'm just going to pop in really fast. And so I would run back and forth to all the venues just to check on stuff. And I would always end up losing my big toenail would always turn black and fall off right after the festival because I would be running around so much.
Wow. Blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, literally. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I wish we could talk for forever, but we can't.
Me too.
I feel like this has been a great talk, but I feel like we've scratched the surface here. But it's now the end of the episode to create something together.
Okay.
One thing that I'm picking up is your vulnerability. You're vulnerable on stage, but I feel like you're vulnerable off stage. And even your idol being Maria Bamford, she's a very vulnerable performer. So I'm curious to pick your brain and maybe that's how we can create something. It's just like talking out how one can take that leap and be vulnerable in their comedy.
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I get that note all the time. That's always what people say about my comedy. And I always have therapists come up afterward and they'll be like, oh my God, I'm a therapist and I've never seen anything so vulnerable in my life. And I used to always be like, that's why it's killing me. It's because it's like, it was so, a lot of times my sets would feel so vulnerable. But it's interesting because I always got that from people. And I think it's weirdly like, it never really felt vulnerable to me until very recent. I think that like for me, what felt vulnerable, like where other people would feel vulnerable, my level of that was like way higher. Like we weren't even too vulnerable that people are like, oh my God, your stuff is so vulnerable. And I'm like, we're not even there. This is just
more
who
of an
I am.
open book. Yeah.
I think okay. So like how people deal with trauma, right, is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I think my way always, since I was a kid, of dealing with the world was I just kind of just always was like guts out. Like I feel like how I always dealt with the world was by being like all in, because I felt like, I don't know. I guess I've always kind of felt like the worst thing that's ever happened to me has already happened, and I've always kind of felt like if I'm honest and I'm just all the way in and I just sort of tell people who I am, there's I don't know how to describe it exactly. I guess right now I feel like if I'm just honest and I just tell you what I'm thinking and I tell you who I am and I tell you where I'm at, then if people attack that, that's their problem. If people are mad about it or they're angry or they're sad, I don't have to then I'm a big fan of criticism, constructive criticism. And I actually love notes. I take notes really well, but I can always tell when somebody has something that's like, hey, actually maybe you're being, you're being privileged or you're being ableist or you're being a bitch, or maybe you came at that too hot versus I don't like you. I don't like you as a person. I don't like where you're coming from. And I feel like if you're just you and you know who that person is and you present it accurately, then when someone doesn't like it, you can just be like, oh, that's fine, dude. That's totally fine. Because then we're just not for each other, because there's no insecurity of kind of having to search around and been like, oh, should I have been friendlier? Should I have not told that story? Should I have not done that? So I guess I've just always, for one, I've just never been, I'm not a great liar. Do you ever play that game Werewolf? Have you ever played that? That game makes me cry. It always makes my kids laugh. It makes me cry because I don't like being lied to, for one thing. It always upsets me because I was lied to a lot as a kid. But then also I don't like to lie. I really do not like the feeling of lying. And so even when it's my turn, I'm like, I am not the werewolf. I'm definitely not the werewolf. And they're like, Mom. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like, I think because for me, honesty is such a core, honesty and accountability are that's who I am as a person. I want that for the rest of my life. So I guess that's just in a podcast. I think sometimes when people are they're not into my comedy because it's too much and they're it's not funny. You're just I think that's one reason I'm not good on podcasts is because I'm just very vulnerable. And people are like, are you ready to riff about Superman? And I'm like, no, I'm here to talk about childhood trauma.
You're the best guest because you're open like that. These are my favorite kinds of conversations.
I always do. I do, feel self-conscious sometimes because I feel like I'm just kind of a serious person a lot of times. And I'm very honest. And, I feel like maybe I'm not a great guest on things just because I'm if you ask me a question, you will get an answer, not a joke,
I appreciate people like that, and I appreciate comics like that. So
Me too.
I think you're a great guest.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think one of the big things that I'm learning is knowing yourself and confident being confident in yourself and okay. Yeah, one thing that I learned, and it's kind of silly where I learned it from because it's a movie Swingers, but there's a line in it where Vince Vaughn says, certain people don't like me, I don't like certain people. And that struck me really hard because I saw that when I was 18 and I was like, oh, I don't have to care if someone doesn't like me because they're people I don't like and that's okay.
Yeah.
You know? I don't like those people because they're jerks and I try to be nice. So if you don't like me, I can just think you're wrong.
Yeah.
and move
Yeah. And
about
I
my
think,
life.
and with comics, a lot of times because we were like weirdos and maybe we're like, a lot of comics weren't like, you know, like we're kind of ostracized as kids or had rough families and stuff. I think that we a lot of times are like very conflict avoidant. And, I think, you know, that comes from being like, well, I don't want this person to reject me. And if I have just reached a point, I guess, in my life where it's just like, I just don't really believe in rejection. Like, that's not a thing for me because like, if I am like, oh, I think you're amazing. And that person's like, I don't like you. I'm like, my feelings still stand, you know, like, it's like, it doesn't really, you know, that's how I feel about comedy. That's how I feel about love. That's how I feel about audiences. Like, I know where I'm coming from. And if people are not into it, then that's fine. That's okay. And the confidence, that's not something you can fake. Unfortunately, you know, it has to come from a genuine place. Like you can do the AA thing of like fake it till you make it for sure. But like, it really has to come from a genuine place of being able to, this is how I got to this place is my therapist made me, for many years, I had to brush my teeth while making eye contact with myself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And if you can get to a place while you're brushing your teeth, you're making eye contact with yourself. And that anytime you say one bad thing about yourself, you have to say 3 nice things. If you can get to that point, I think like you can start to, confidence is a skill set. You know, it's not, if you had, maybe you had great parents and you just came out like, oh, my boyfriend, my partner, Alex, he is just one of those people who like had good parents. He was loved growing up and he's confident and he likes himself. And that's dope. I was for me, it was something I had to like develop brick by brick. You know, I had to like build that wall of confidence slowly over time of being like, I'm smart. And I would have to be like, it's okay to call yourself smart. It's not, you know, you don't have to be ashamed of thinking you're smart. Like,
that's great.
You know, I think in our society, it's you're shit on for being smart. You're shit on for being creative. I think you need to just like get away from all the shame of that. And yeah, I really think I'm pretty dope now. And that helps when someone else is like I get a lot of hate on the internet, like this Bill Maher thing. Now that I've said this, there'll be, when this episode comes out, there'll be a wave of dudes being like, fuck you. But like, if you're like, I don't care, Bill Maher doesn't like me either. You know, like, it's mutual.
On Twitter, like, you know, it's out there. It's not news.
Yeah. And I think not.
Ben Affleck called him Islamophobic to his face on his show.
Yeah.
You know, people don't like this. They could deal with it.
Yeah. It's funny because the people who like, I think of Kyle Kinane as being somebody who like, Kyle has this just beautiful natural confidence about him that like Kyle has done shit where like, you know, like he's told somebody off in front of me where I was like, whoa. And that person still liked him because the way he did it came from a place of like not meanness, integrity, compassion, and also just like, I feel like, you know, you can get away with that if you're like, I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just letting you know how I feel. And Kyle is like a perfect example. If you're like wondering, like, what does true, like healthy confidence look like? I always think of Kinane, you know, like he's got that good, I love that energy, you know, and I want to get to that
guy.
Yeah.
So he is a sweet guy and he is really confident and he is like very straightforward in the nicest way possible. Really. I mean, he's great. He's great.
Yeah, he's really great. See, I like men. I love Kinane, so.
There it is. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm sorry that it took so long. I'm glad that you hit me up again because this has been very, very fun. It was really great.
How awesome. I admire and appreciate her a lot. Big thanks to her. If you want to keep up with her, you can, and support her Patreon at Emma Arnold at patreon.com, and check out her YouTube at EmmaBean6. You can see her special Yes Please on there. She also has a website, emmaarnoldcomedy.com, links in bio. Also follow her on Twitter at I Am a Road Trip, Instagram at Sleeve Hamster, and Facebook at Emma Arnold Comedy. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at There It Is Pod. Also subscribe to our Comedy Lifestyle newsletter and support us if you can. We have a Patreon and a PayPal. Go to thereitispod.com. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.